The following program sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.
About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth, and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
It's Friday afternoon, and we're going to be talking about money. You know, today's September 11th, the 14th anniversary. It's a day of our generation. It was a generation ago, before September 11th, a day that lived in infamy was December the 7th. It was that generation which thought about December 7th as a very special day. Today, you know, as we've gone along and as those men who fought in World War II and those families that were surrounded in World War II, that's kind of faded into the background. And the new day is September 11th. It seems to me that it changes generation to generation. That's the same way our investments change. What was good for a previous generation may not be good for the current generation. But before we get to that, and I want to talk about some of that, I want to remind you that B740 Studios is offering a 15% discount to any projects that are booked in this month or the next month. They have an accomplished staff of filmmakers, designers, writers, editors, and producers. They do print, they do broadcasting. They're architects of moving images. And they were guests on this program. And after being guests on this program, they want to see if they get a response by giving 15% discounts. So you have to say that you heard about it, about money, but do so. It's also a very good deal. You know, there's been this concept floating around that we don't manufacture anything in the U.S., that it's all moved offshore. And the reality is we have lost jobs. Since 1979, manufacturing has lost 7.8 million jobs. At least those are the figures as of 2012, and I wouldn't be surprised if that number hasn't increased. There's a general feeling we don't make anything in the U.S. But the fact is, in 2014, we had a record output of manufactured goods. In total, we produce almost $2 trillion of manufactured goods. That's a record. 17 to 18% of the world's produced manufactured goods are produced in the U.S. Now, that's down since from almost 30% in the 1980s, but part of that is because there's more manufacturers and there's more consumption of manufacturing product. Japan at one time, number two, Japan now does $917 billion. That's half of what we do. China is number one, $2.7 trillion, almost 35% more than we produce here in dollar terms. However, in that period of 2003 to 2010, 25% of that came because of the dollar value increasing against their currency. And of course, we've just gone through this devaluation of the currency, so that'll come down. But you know, if you look at manufacturing, we've almost quadrupled the amount of manufacturing, even though our number of jobs has declined. You know, 1979, we had 19.6 million jobs. In 2012, we had 11.8, and yet our production has gone up. So what's created that? It's productivity. You know, on this program, we've had OMAC, who talked about water cutting, a significant change. And I always think about lathe. You know, I remember growing up and being around a shop where they had a lathe, and it was a wood lathe, but it worked the same as metal. And you had a lathe operator who by eye would run that machine. Well, a few years ago, I had a chance to go through a machine shop, and see how it's done today. It's not done by a lathe operator actually eyeballing it. They take a computer, they make a design. It's a computer-aided design. They feed it into a machine, and that machine does the work. They take a large chunk of metal, the machine carves it up, and they carve it into with dimensions which an eyeball cannot even get close to. They carve it into pieces at times, and pieces they can actually machine to thinner than a hair, a human hair. Incredible technology. Whereas in that old lathe method, with the person who had to eyeball it, almost 80% of the cost of a part was labor. Today, in a modern machine shop, less than 5% is labor. Production is actually increased, and the labor has decreased. I want to take you back to give you some perspective on all this. I want to take you back over 150 years ago. In 1850, in this country, there were 23 million people. You think today we have 318 million? Back in 1850, there were 23 million people, but 11 million of those people worked on the farm. That's almost half of the population worked on the farm. Our exports were primarily agricultural, and they amounted to $189 million. 81% of total exports, agricultural products. Cotton alone in 1850 accounted for 54% of agricultural products, over half with 124 million. Keep those numbers in mind. We'll come back on the quiz. In 1900, we'd grown to 76 million people, but we had 29 million farmers. But now, instead of 50% of the population, it had dropped to 38. Agricultural exports had grown to 917 million, but as a percentage of total exports, it had dropped to just over 50%. We were still farming, but it wasn't just cotton. We were exporting food as well. Now fast forward to 2014. Here's the situation. We have 318 million people, but only 994,000 are farming. Less than 1 million people are doing the farming today. That's like 1/3% are working the farms. Remember, 1850, 50%, almost 50% of the population were working farms. And in 2014, our agricultural exports equaled $149.5 billion. Not million, billion. Almost 1,000-fold increase from what we were producing in 1850. And we were producing that with fewer than 1 million people, whereas it took 11 million people to do it in 1850. And you think about it. Back in 1850, you had the farmers who were hand plowing with their horse or their mule or whatever. They were plowing the fields. They were out there physically cutting the product. They were picking the product. It was all manual, physical labor. Today, you have tractors, you have combines, you have automation. You walk into a milking parlor today, they're milking hundreds of cows, and they're storing that in a milk tank, and a truck comes around every other day or so, picks up the milk and hauls it away. It's no longer that picture of Fiddler on the Roof. Remember the guy with the cow as he walked from place to place and milked the cow? You had fresh milk because it was milked right there in front of you. No longer the way. Today, those milking parlors exist because they're automated. The equipment is automated. The milk flows from the cow into the tank without much human interaction at all. We've increased productivity, and a similar thing is happening in manufacturing, not just in manufacturing and service areas as well, but in manufacturing. Total employment has been dropping since 1940 over 35%. Output from 1940 to 2012 has grown 15-fold. From 1940 to 2012, output has grown 12-fold, while employment, the numbers have dropped. It's not just that we're losing jobs overseas. It's not just that we aren't competitive overseas. We are actually very competitive in a lot of manufacturing that we're doing. We're losing the jobs not overseas, but because of productivity. Think about the products that we buy. Think about the result of that. You know, when my parents bought a TV a long time ago, they paid almost $450 for a set that was 21 inches. I believe it was 21 inches in diagonally. And it was like 2 feet thick and 3 feet long. And you had 3 channels. Today, for the same amount, you can buy a 40-inch or 45 or 48 or 50-inch flat screen TV that has a better quality, a better production, and a greater output. We'll come back to this after the commercial break, so don't go away. We've got a lot more to say. And I've got a great guest. You got to hear what he has to say on this whole subject.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Your business leader for Seattle is 1300 KKOL.
Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Do you own a home or have plans to in the future? Don't miss Real Estate Radio Seattle with Nick Neal, Saturdays at 2 p.m. on Money Radio 1300 KKOL. You'll get all the information you need to know about what's happening in the local real estate market and how to take advantage of that knowledge. Whether you're buying, selling, or investing, listen to Real Estate Radio Northwest with Nick Neal, Saturdays at 2 p.m. here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL.
We're back with more about money. For details on what you hear on today's show, visit adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Now, here again is Mike Adams.
So I've been talking about manufacturing. There's this perception that's been going around that we're losing manufacturing, that it's going overseas. You know, the reality is we're producing a lot of manufacturing here, but that manufacturing is changing. Not only is it changing in what we're manufacturing, it's changing in how we manufacture. We're gaining tremendous amounts of productivity. I laid the parallel in the first segment about the agriculture. In agriculture in 1850, half the people lived on the farm. Today we produce almost 1,000 times more with 10% the labor, less than 10% the labor. The same thing is happening on the manufacturing side. And yet to find skilled labor is always an issue. You know, we've seen factories shut down, and through 2008, 2009, it was a very highly visible thing. It was in part due to management complacency, resistance to change by the unions. It was due in part to globalization, cheaper labor overseas. But, you know, it wasn't just that. It was productivity. And it was in some cases, the inability for companies to make the change. You know, you look at General Motors. At one time in the 1950s, they had 50% of the car market. Chevrolet was the second largest GDP in the world, second only to the United States itself. There were fears at GM that they were going to break up the company because Chevrolet was so large. There were 3 car companies, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. They dominated the world market. Today, just for the U.S., there's 7 or more. And although the 3 American companies are regaining some of their market share, it's not going to be where it was. And we're seeing tremendous changes even in the car market. You think of the electric cars that are coming on, from Tesla to the Prius to all those cars, the Volt. That's making a huge change. And it's making a change not just in the consumption of fuel and the design of cars, but they're being manufactured more efficiently. The times they're really changing. We've seen the impact of computerizing so many of the functions on the job floor, of making robots that can actually do repeatable jobs. If a job can be automated, it's being automated. And those automation jobs are gains of productivity. We gain. As consumers, we gain from that because it reduces the cost to us over the long term. We're seeing changes actually in manufacturing technology. I think of 3D printing, and you think if in the old days, if you wanted to produce a prosthetic, you had to produce 1,000 or 1,500 to make it viable. Today, we can do it one at a time, and we can design it to fit the person. You can do that with 3D printing. Just load a computer program in, let the computer program run the machine, and it will produce a product. There are, recently, 2 houses have been built with 3D printers. They're talking about building a bridge using 3D technology. The times they're changing. Manufacturing is changing. And that brings me to my guest today, the founder and CEO of ID Integration, Gary Moe. Welcome to the program, Gary.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
So we're not talking about 3D printing, but we're talking about ID. We'll get to that. But first, let's start with your background.
Sure. I am a native Seattleite. Went to the University of Washington, studied chemical engineering, got out of college, and started selling industrial equipment in the Pacific Northwest. This was about in 1983, 84. We were selling a lot to the shipyards and the crane industry at the time, gearboxes, propulsion systems for ships. And we had quite a change in the market here in the Northwest, and a lot of those jobs went away. So in the early 90s, we were forced to look for new products, and we began selling laser marking systems for product identification. Got interested and introduced into this new 2-dimensional barcode technology called data matrix code that was being used by NASA as a way to directly mark the tiles on the space shuttle. We introduced and worked with Boeing in the mid-90s to roll out that technology at Boeing, and we actually came up with a process and technique to put a barcode on drill bits and cutters on the 777 wing fastening system.
So when you say the barcode thing, when most people think of a barcode, you think of the barcode that you get at the supermarket where you're buying ketchup or you're buying mustard or you're buying bread or whatever it is. That's a fairly large barcode.
Correct. That's called a one-dimensional or a UPC code that's on the groceries. This new technology called data matrix code developed for NASA is actually a very small checkerboard pattern square, and they call it a 2-dimensional barcode. And you see that now on postage and pharmaceuticals, medical. It's become a common standard now in the barcode industry.
And is it more, I'm trying to think of the word, is it easier to read in a lot of ways?
Some of the benefits are, especially for industrial uses in manufacturing, it has error correction built into the code. So we can actually damage and destroy up to 20% of the barcode, and the barcode scanners can still read that mark. You can also get a lot of data in a small area. So that's part of the power. So whereas a UPC code on some groceries at the store may be a 6 or 7 numeric character, with our two-dimensional barcodes, I can get up to 50, 60, 70 characters of information in a small area on a part or on a label.
I would imagine if they developed it for the tiles on the space shuttle, it also has to be both durable heat-wise and durable strength-wise, and can't take a lot of space.
Correct. And there's many different printing techniques and marking technologies to apply these barcodes onto parts, and one of them is laser engraving or laser etching. We can actually laser etch that barcode into a piece of metal that will withstand high heat. We're working on engine parts for General Electric. The turbine blades have a laser etch on some of the parts of engines, landing gear on planes and helicopters, bearings. So it is a very robust technology for barcoding. Typically, the 1D the barcodes people are familiar with are on labels and packaging, but we have the capability to actually mark a very high-end parts with those barcodes. And that was the technology we really developed with Boeing in the mid-1990s. And we were very far ahead, even being a small business and a small company here in the Northwest. We have some probably more experience than most people in the world in this type of technology. And today it's even applicable to surgical tools, dental instruments, very small components, microelectronics. Intel and chip manufacturers are putting these barcodes on microprocessors, and automotive industry now uses this on marking camshafts and engines. So the technology today has become very common.
And ID integration does a lot of this barcode. I don't know, It's not it is manufacturing.
We call it, systems integration, and what has been driving a lot of this barcoding technology has been industry standards for aerospace, and especially now within our U.S. military. There's a policy called UID, Unique Identification, and it requires any government asset or part over $5,000 in value to have this barcode on it. And that barcode essentially becomes the Social Security number of that item. And so the same concept like our Social Security numbers, we throughout our life, we move, if you're a woman, you might get married and your part number changes, your name, but you're still tracked within a database. And kind of the same concept for parts, as that part gets maintained, as it goes into inventory, repaired, as it gets put on different, like Chinook helicopters, for instance, is a big program we've been supporting for over 10 years. There's over 500 parts now on each helicopter that have this unique barcode. So now we can have barcode scanners in the soldiers' hands, the maintainers' hands, to scan that, to do their maintenance function for inventory, for tracking purposes. Recently, the FDA came out with a policy called UDI, Unique Device Identification, similar concept, so they're going to have a globally unique identification schema for medical devices around the world. So this has really driven a lot of the manufacturers to it's kind of nice for our business sometimes in that the business case for the manufacturer is if you don't do it, you don't get paid or you don't meet a contract. So they've been kind of pushed into investing and doing this technology.
And I think it's really worthwhile because you can track what the parts are doing. If you have early failures, you can go and correct those.
Correct. There's many benefits, for tracking and traceability through manufacturing processes, warranty repair, life cycle tracking, work in process tracking of manufacturing.
We're going to come back right after the commercial break, so don't go away. We've got more to talk about here. It's a fascinating thing to know that they track everything. Anyway, we'll be right back after the commercial break. Don't go away. We've got a lot to say.
Stay tuned. About Money returns in a moment with Mike Adams here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Now we return to About Money. There's more information waiting for you at adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here again is your host, Mike Adams.
I'm here with Gary Moe of ID Integration. Gary, you mentioned the Chinook helicopter, and I'm kind of curious what triggered all of that.
Sure, Mike. The Chinook was probably not unique in many cases, but they had, in the late 1990s, they actually had to ground the fleet of helicopters because Boeing had received some bad gear material from a supplier. They knew the serial number identification of the bad material, but they could not identify what helicopter tail number that material was on. So they had to ground the whole fleet, tear apart the transmissions, and find those bad parts. So out of that came a better configuration management, more of a digital maintenance management, digital management system for the helicopter. But they also realized they needed much better tracking than having a mechanic or soldier look at a part and humanly try to read that data plate, write it down on a piece of paper, and then give it to another person to type into the computer system. And so, unfortunately, that's the way our military is tracking many parts and assets. So the benefits obviously are huge.
Very huge. So part of it is the barcode, but you go beyond the barcode. You go to RFID, right?
Yes, that's a technology we've been. Actually, we worked on a project at Boeing over 10 years ago. We took the little RFID tag people might be familiar with putting in pets, for tracking pets at the vets, and we encapsulated it into a rivet and put it on a part and tracked it through the process at Boeing. Many years ago, the very kind of old technology. But within the last few years, we've seen a great increase in the variety and the quality of the RFID chip and tag technology, in the reader technology, and software systems. So it's an area we're really expanding in to our customer base in providing RFID asset tracking and location tracking systems.
So I want to stop a second and have you define RFID for the listeners that don't know what RFID is.
Sure. RFID stands for radio frequency identification. And we actually use RFID, probably everyone almost every day. Our key fobs, for our car that open and close the door are based on a radio frequency identification. The Easy Pass in our car going, over the 520 bridge is based on RFID technology. You go over the bridge and you see those big readers. Those are, RFID readers, and Easy Pass is tied to your driver's license and your credit card. So as you go through, in the stores, we have the electronic article surveillance tags. Mm-hmm. If they don't turn them off, that it beeps as you go through the portal. That's RFID technology.
So that's something that's come in the last 10 or 15 years. You see it everywhere.
Correct. You're starting to see that, and about maybe 6, 7 years ago, we heard there's also been a lot of hype in RFID. I think 6, 7 years ago, Walmart came out and said, hey, we're going to invest in RFID. And, the concept was we could have labels on all the items in a grocery store. You could put it in your cart. You push the cart through the portal or your RFID reader checkout stand. It would read all your items, give you the bill, and, automated checkout. Well, they didn't quite figure out the challenges of putting RFID tags on metal, on liquids. Items with liquids was a big technology challenge. But in the last couple of years, many companies worldwide, globally now have overcome that, and we have very good durable tags that we can mount on metal parts, on liquids, that can withstand very bad environments. So the technology's improved dramatically in the last couple of years.
In addition to just the transmission of radio frequency, aren't they building chips now with chips as well?
Well, there's been some great innovation coming out now where you're embedding sensors in chips. I think maybe that's what you're talking about, like temperature sensors, shock, accelerometer, even material composition sensors that can then feed data back via radio frequency, and which ultimately ties back into this Internet of Things.
Yes.
There's a lot of buzz and a lot of hype going on about the Internet of Things, but essentially items and things and assets are given a digital identity with a connection to a web. And we see that happening now in manufacturing, and there's a company that we're partnered with out of Pasadena area that has developed some very innovative technology where the RFID tags are active now. They have batteries in them, but the tags communicate to other tags, and it sets up its own network. They call it a self-generating mesh network of RFID. So one of the big costs and the complexity typically of RFID systems is having to run the cables, the Ethernet cables and power cables to the readers and the antenna systems. It gets very costly also, where the part with an RFID tag has to go through a door or a portal with a reader on it. But now having the capability to let the tags read and communicate data through other tags on their own network eliminates that complexity and cost, and is very innovative, and I think is going to open up many new applications. We've, in the last 6 months, received a couple large orders from Fortune 100 type manufacturing companies that are large in aerospace and the military for doing this on a large scale basis. So it's been very exciting for us.
It's really making a change on what happens with RFID.
Yeah, and we'd like to tell our customers, you still can't change the physics. It has to, like any new technology, it has to be a good fit. The business case has to be there. You deal with people, processes. So I think what makes ID Integration unique as a systems integrator, where we take the hardware, we take the readers, the software, but we also have to look at the people, the processes of a company, the methodology of how they do business, their software systems, and to come up with a system that's easy to use but ultimately gives them a return on investment.
So let's talk about the return on investment and the productivity. Give us an example of a place where using this technology, they've made significant improvements.
In some of the cases, as you can imagine, here's one case for our military. We were at a Army base, and we saw there was a maintainer, a soldier that was doing maintenance. He had to type in part number, serial number, information into the screen, on a screen. Then he did a maintenance application. He went to the next screen. We kind of do that on our computers. He had to type in the same information, a 15-character part number, a serial number, did some things, went to screen 3, had to type in the same information. he mistakenly hit the wrong part number, it kicked him back to screen 1 to start inputting again. We gave him a barcode scanner with this 2D code on it that could parse that information and fill out his field with that information automatically. He said it probably saves him 2 hours a day, and just the frustration for doing that. The labor savings in RFID, I mean, we're talking 3 to 10 times benefit and then capturing accurate and good data.
I've heard that some of the airlines also use this.
Yes, there is a new requirement coming from Boeing and Airbus to put RFID tags on serialized parts on airplanes now, and it's a new policy that's just rolling out. But Delta Airlines has been one of the early adopters for this, and they've been putting RFID tags on life vests and the seat cushions, and also on oxygen generators. And these are the bottles that are up in the panels of the airplane that provide oxygen in case you need it. And I saw a video that they did, and I believe on a 777 airplane, there's 167 oxygen generators. When they do a check, they have to pull all the panels down, unscrew the canisters, look at the label on it, and make sure that it's not expired. There's expiration dates on the oxygen generators. And it takes a person over 8 hours to do that function. With a RFID label on the oxygen generator, they can walk down the aisles of the plane and within 2 minutes read every single tag through RFID technology, and the labor savings is obviously huge.
I'm sure that is, and it's a fascinating area. It's one of those small things where you begin to gain productivity and gain in the manufacturing process, but it's also something that reduces the cost to the consumer.
Yes,
Very good. Well, thanks for being on the program, Gary.
Yes, thanks a lot, Mike. We appreciate it.
And we're coming to commercial break. Don't go away, because I want to close out with a couple things. And we will have Gary on just right after the commercial break, so don't go away. We'll be right back.
About Money with Mike Adams will resume in a moment on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Lots of people manage investment portfolios. Just a few can manage a successful portfolio and provide exceedingly great service to their clients. Here's Mike Adams from Adams Financial Concepts.
We believe the price you pay should be based on the performance of your portfolio and the quality of service you receive.
You know, Mike, it seems that a lot of companies subscribe to the one-size-fits-all mentality of investing. Does one size really fit all?
Not with us. Every portfolio that we manage is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. We place our clients' interests first in all portfolio decisions.
If you're looking for a home for your seven-figure plus investment portfolio, call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts, specializing in creating and maintaining wealth for over 20 years. 206-903-1019. That's 206-903-1019. Or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
About Money continues. Remember the website adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So we're just finishing up with Gary Moe of ID Integration, and I just wanted to let him tell you how you can contact him if you might have a problem or an area where you think you can use RFID or one of the other identification technologies or integrations that they do. So I'll let you tell people, Gary,
Sure.
How would they contact you?
Yeah, thanks again, Mike, for being here. And we are based out of Mukilteo, but we have offices even around the country. And the best place to get us is our website. It's www.id, like identification, the hyphen, -integration.com. we have a lot of good information, videos, and we're happy to come out and do site visits and meet with manufacturers and potential customers.
That's great.
Thanks.
Very interesting company, very interesting field, really making a difference in what goes on. So again, I wanted to remind you about B47 Studios offering 15% off any projects booked in September or October. Go do it. They're really architects of moving images. They do print, they do broadcast media. They help you get your message across and create more revenues and customers. Anyway, I want to shift and talk about something. I talked about this a few months ago, too. It came out of an Economist that was published in April of 2015. Talked about the year 2015. 1815 was a time you had Waterloo with Napoleon. You had a final decision with the Congress of Vienna to redraw the borders of Europe. You had rebalancing countries, distribution of power. It was the birth of Otto von Bismarck. Huge events happened in 1815, but maybe the biggest event of all was the eruption of Mount Tambora. It's a volcano on the Indonesian island of Sumbawa. It blew up. We who lived through this volcano of Mount St. Helens remember how much the ash spread. But not only did Mount Tambora blow, it blew in a spectacular fashion. Molten rock blew 25 miles into the air. 25 miles. We had lava flows that came out of Mount St. Helens that flowed down the side. Imagine molten rock blown 25 miles into the air. The most powerful eruption in over 500 years. The ash spread over hundreds of thousands of miles. Think, Mount St. Helens covered mostly Washington. Ash covered even some of the U.S., but not the world. Billions of tons of dust and gas and rock blown everywhere. And it set off multiple tsunamis. 60,000 to 120,000 people died in Indonesia alone. The sulfur hit the stratosphere. In New England, clothes froze on the wash lines. In New England, Indonesia to New England, Maine and New Hampshire. Glaciers in the Alps began to grow and surge, coming down the Alps. In Britain, they had an oversupply of grain, and so they passed what were called the Corn Laws. This is before 1815. They wanted to limit the amount of production of corn. When Mount Tambora blew, it so darkened the sky and so changed the weather pattern that they suspended the Corn Laws in Britain. There were thousands that starved in China, and typhus spread widely in Europe. Most of the ash fell, but some of the ash stayed for over a year. Temperatures worldwide were an average of 4 degrees lower. That's a very, very significant. It lowered the amount of rainfall by over 4%. 1816 was a cold and wet year with lower crops worldwide. Mount Tambora, nothing like it in the last 500 years. Nothing. So what does all that have to do with investments? Well, let me tell you, there's an article that came out in Investment News this week called Advisors Can Demonstrate Value Propositions with Downside Protection to Calm Investors Over Volatility Fears. Now, several years ago, I went to a conference, and one of the presentations was by a money manager who had a very elaborate way to protect the downside for his clients. So we'd just gone through 2008, 2009. It was a very terrifying time to go through, if you remember. He had a way to almost guarantee you wouldn't go through the downtime. And there's no such thing as a guarantee, but as close as you can get to it, you could almost be sure that you would not go through a downtime. he claimed it was 100% protection against the downside. He might have been right. But the cost was over 6% per year to implement this. 6% a year. So think about that. If stock returns are 10%, this reduces your return to 4%. The impact over 20 years, if you start with $100,000, you implement his system and you run it for 20 years to make sure you don't have to go through any 2008, 2009 time period, that 100,000 might grow to 240,000. But if you don't use his system and you get a 10% return on the stocks, those stocks grow to 930,000. So that protection doesn't cost you just 6% a year. That 6,000 over 20 years, 6,000 over 20 years is just 120,000. No, it cost you $700,000 in lost potential gains. 700,000. Starting with 100,000, instead of having 930, you have 240. That's a lot of comfort to protect against the downside. I believe that studies show that strategic investing does much better than tactical investing. There's a Fidelity study that was done by John Vander Heiden and Peter Lynch back in 1981 to 91, showed that if you missed just the 10 best trading days, just the 10 best in 10 years, you reduced your return from 14% to 4%. Carla Freed did it for Money Magazine, taking the time period 1982 to 2001, and missing the best 30 days out of 20 years reduced your return from $93,000 on a $10,000 investment to $28,000. Yes, it's true. If you miss the worst days, you can have even better results. But you then have to guess. You have to guess at what the worst days are going to be. And you have to guess what the best days are going to be. If you are a long-term investor and remain invested, you may get the volatility, you may go through the rides, but you end up with the best returns. It's been shown. Jack Bogle of Vanguard said, in my 50 years in the business, I have never known anyone, nor have I ever known anyone who knew anyone who could time the market accurately. That's from a guy that's been around 50 years, built the Vanguard family of funds to what it is today. If he doesn't know anyone, I certainly don't know anyone. So with that, I leave you for the weekend. Have a very good weekend. I will be back next week to think about B47 and do contact ID integration if you have an issue in manufacturing. Have a great week, and I will be back Friday.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you want Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on AdamsFinancialConcepts.com. That's AdamsFinancialConcepts.com. The information shared on the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Friday afternoon at 3 for more About Money with Mike Adams, here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL.
The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Your business leader for Seattle is 1300 KKOL.